record. Okay. All right, so we just wrapped up how we look at the different associations that we can find and claims that you can make once you have data. We looked at validity, how we assess whether a research is done well and whether any of the data that they find is meaningful, right? That's a big piece in research. Now we're going to talk about ethics because, that's fun to chat about. So let me make sure that that is here. Make sure that you guys can see it. Here we go. Where are you all? Here. All right. And when we hear about ethics, what comes to mind for you guys? Like, do we need ethics in research? Why or why not?
I'm recalling the beginning of our certification, and there are examples of why we really do need ethics. So like the Tuskegee Airmen experiment and the Nazi experiments and all that terrible historical awfulness.
Yeah. Now, all very good points there, Elizabeth. One thing you mentioned, though, that is you said all those terrible historical events, right? Things that have happened in the past. Now,
it can still happen.
Okay, that was my question. What do we think? Do we think ethical violations are still happening?
Absolutely.
Okay. No. Why is that?
Okay.
Yeah.
There's always going to be people that are vulnerable to, I guess we all took the certification. So there's always going to be groups that could benefit from like the rewards of an experiment. And we have to be careful that we phrase it in a way that doesn't force, quote unquote, force people into situations that they may not be able to say no to.
Yes. Okay, good. Other thoughts? Noella, those were good on the chat. Go ahead.
Now, my biggest question, so for the Stanford prison experiment.
Yeah.
So was it unethical for him to place himself in the experiment as the warden?
Phil
or is
Zimbardo?
that just what? Yes. Or is that just him being like becoming biased? I didn't know if that was an ethical thing or a bias thing.
So it's interesting you bring this up because I don't talk about the Stanford prison experiment in this lecture, but in my other research class, we ended up talking a lot about it as well. So, no, I think actually it was important that he be the warden because playing the what if game, if he had not been intimately involved with what was going on, the study may have lasted the entire time that it was actually set out to be, which I want to say was weeks.
Yeah,
like
I think it was
6
like 3 weeks. 6?
Yeah. And in the end, how long did it last?
2 days?
Yes. They're like, we are shutting this down. Bad things are happening. So I think had he not been present, more harm would have been done. Now, as to whether bias would have been present in terms of examining the data, that is a good question. Because if you're inserting yourself as a principal researcher, but also as the ultimate authority in this, environment where you are testing out the issue of authority, what does that look like? How are you going to interpret? Like, so for instance, the first thing that comes to mind is if you are an authority figure, right? Zimbardo was. Perhaps he would have found a way to justify some of the acts that were really heinous from the guards' perspective because they shared that common trait of being authority figures within the study.
Okay.
I think, however, because he was overseeing it, saw how bad things were and shut it down right away, that was to his benefit. And actually, he was really an open book in, describing what ended up happening. He could have, an unethical researcher could have said, it wasn't that bad. We just thought we should stop it. No, he described how horrible it was. And in fact, that was the point of discussion we had in the other classes. What backlash did he face from that study? Because we use it as a seminal study of what not to do, like the negatives and how the implication, there was not necessarily deception. It's not like he hid the goal of the experiment. People were randomly assigned. So the crux of the study was solid in terms of an experiment design. The results were shocking, and he did the right thing by stopping it. Had he not, that's when he would have been in trouble.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So lots of examples come to mind of unethical research, because as we go through experimentation, more things get discovered, right? Like the first few research on discussion threads as support in a virtual environment. So it was with cancer patients. The first, it was like pre-AOL chat rooms. It was on this like asynchronous message board. They discovered, some people would say some pretty atrocious things because they felt a sense of anonymity. And so then they developed from there on consent forms and knowing what it's like and what is appropriate behavior and discussion like threads and things like that. So I don't think we will stop having bad examples, because as research evolves, so do we rise to that level, right? To know like what is ethical behavior and how can we protect all participants. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so that is the topic for today. So we are going to be looking at several historical examples. We're going to talk about how those then led to some core ethical principles that we need to follow. And then interwoven in there, we'll talk also about the guides for the Psychological Association and what specific ethical principles they have. It really lines up well with the Belmont article. We'll talk about that. And then also knowing, how do we balance out possible risk to possible rewards? Because that is why we do research, right? You may go, well, no, we do research because we're told to do research for academic circles. But really the goal is to discover something about human behavior, about humankind, medicine, whatever, which will hopefully benefit most while providing the least amount of impact that is negative on our participants. Okay. So the two major historical examples we'll talk about is the Tuskegee syphilis study, which took place from 1932 to 1972. And there are three major ethical violations in that study that we'll talk about. And then the next one we'll talk about is the Milgram obedience study. Now, quick show of hands. Are people familiar with both of those? Does it kind of ring a bell?
Yep.
I might know the obedience study, but I can't tell you by the names.
Is the obedience study the one where there's a buzzer and they're told to stop? And okay.
Yep. Okay. So let's dive in. Again, these are not pleasant examples. They're not, it doesn't make us proud, right? These are moments that you're like, oh, did we really do that? That seems messed up. And I've got a barking dog, so I'm just going to get him in real quick. All right, come on in, you. No, all the way in. All right, he's barking at the neighbors, and my husband's in a meeting too. So, dog's just going to bark. All right, so the Tuskegee study was done. Let's back it up. Okay, so 1932, what's happening in the world, right? There's diseases that are at play. More medical research is being done. We're discovering new methods and antibiotics to treat diseases. And syphilis specifically played a large part in the 20s and early 30s as being something that was more widespread, causing lots of impact on people. Now, let's take COVID again, because COVID is, sadly, it's part of all of our days. When we first heard about COVID, what did we know about its symptoms?
Coughing.
Okay, coughing was one. What are some others?
Shortness of breath.
Shortness of breath, good.
Loss of taste and smell.
Okay, who said that?
Me.
Narelle?
Yeah.
Okay. So I would say Narelle, very good. Did we know that from the beginning though? That kind of came a little later, I think, right?
Oh yeah, I guess it did come like
Okay.
once everyone
Yeah.
had different symptoms. So
Oh, but this is perfect because you're playing right into my hand and the point I'm trying to make. Okay, so original symptoms, shortness of breath, cough. What was another big hallmark? Fever, right? Fever, and they're not killing each other. They're just playing. They're just loud. Oh my goodness. I feel like you guys need to see this nonsense. Just total craziness. Yeah, okay.
So cute.
So crazy. They are crazy. And now my boys are going to be home soon, so they'll be more crazy, and we'll just ignore it. COVID, right? So fever, cough, shortness of breath. Okay. Every time there are more cases, more positive discovered, what the doctors want to know from their patients.
What like? Who have you been in contact with? Have you been out of the country?
Okay, good. Those are good, like tracing. But in terms of, okay, you tested positive. They want to know, what are your symptoms, right? What's going on with you? And now let's keep track of you and see if you start feeling better or if you start feeling way worse. Now let's give you flu medication. Does that help? Turns out no. Let's give you Advil. Does that help? No. Okay. What was the other medication they gave that like was kind of popular for a little bit?
Hydroxychloroquine.
Yes, which is a medication that's given for people who are also suffering of malaria. Am I right about that? No. It's a coexisting. It wasn't like, it was off-label use.
Was it like Alzheimer's or
I didn't think it was
diabetes?
Alzheimer's.
Maybe
What's that?
was it maybe diabetes?
Not diabetes. It was like a really, so now it's gonna bother me, you guys, and I have an issue that I can't let stuff go. So we're just gonna, just bear with me. If someone knows it, just say it. Take me out of my misery.
are you thinking of like zinc?
No, that is good though, because that was, okay. Hydroxychloroquine.
Malaria and lupus.
Malaria. Okay, so I'm not totally bananas. These are the moment I need to grow as a human and let some of these things go, but then I get hyper focused. Okay, so back to why we're talking about this. Symptoms, right? They're getting more data. With more data, you start getting a sense of what is the path of the disease, right? When the first person on earth got a cold, they were like, whoa, what is going on? Why can't you breathe? You got stuff coming out of your nose. You seem to be in a fog, right? They get more and more data from people. And so they're able to map out, this is the course of this disease. This is what it looks like. And we know with a common cold, if you do nothing, take nothing, it will like wash itself out of your system. If you get a stomach virus, some sort of gastroenteritis, if you do nothing, just drink some liquids as much as you can, it will go away within the course of 2 days. If it doesn't, then that's maybe indicative of another virus, disease, whatever. Contact your primary care provider, right? So every new disease needs far more data so we understand the course of it. So now let's go back to what we're talking about, syphilis. That sounds from COVID to syphilis. We're hitting all the really high notes in this class here. With syphilis, they had some understanding of the disease, especially when the introduction of penicillin took place as a treatment for it. But they wanted to know, what does it look like if syphilis goes untreated? Now, is that a good idea? If you have an approved treatment that solves it, why would you want to know what it looks like if you don't treat it? So it was,
that falls into the, if it doesn't have any medical, like positive effects on humanity's wellness, then we shouldn't do it.
exactly, right. So that is at the crux of it, right? And we'll talk about that in a minute in terms of ethical violation. So if their research question was based on a curiosity that was not going to benefit the masses by answering it and was instead causing harm, which it was because they were withholding an approved medication to treat a disease, right? Just to see what would happen, right? What happens if we don't treat syphilis? What's going to go on? So they found this group of African American male that tended to be just either very poor or poorly educated or a combination of both. 4 of them had syphilis already. Researchers told them, did not disclose they had syphilis, just said, hey, you have bad blood, but I am a medical doctor. I'm a white man treating you. So again, we can talk about racial issues there as well. And so they were being treated for this bad blood, so to speak. They were not given penicillin, even though it was an approved treatment and had shown to be effective, which led to dozens of them dying and for a much larger spread of the disease to both spouses, sexual partners, and in children with congenital syphilitis. So huge impact, right? Huge. Just to see, we are curious what it looks like if we don't actually move through and treat it. So there are 3 kinds of ethical violation. This is a gentleman that, again, there's a whole movie about it, but it's an hour, so we don't have the time in this class to watch it. But one of the surviving members that really pushed for ethical reform with research. So 3 ethical violations. The first one is that the participants were really not treated with respect, right? They weren't told whether or not they had syphilis, so there was definitely information that was withheld, which we don't do. Okay, go back out. Driving me crazy, dog. They were not told about possible cures that were available. And there was a huge piece about coercion. So you discuss that in getting your certification, right? If the participants need to be able to give informed consent without being forced into the study. So it cannot be, we will give you all this money, you have no money, or in this case, they were providing a generous burial fee, like they would just pay for somebody to be buried and they didn't have any money. So that was massively impactful. Noella, I'm not sure I understand your question. You just asked me who was used for COVID-19 testing. What do you mean?
Like for vaccine?
Oh, so I think people were asked to participate. It's meant to be representative of the general population. I am not super well versed on their entire research database of who they tested, but that's what I suspect. So Spectrum Health has 2 studies currently that are open with children and young adults, and so people were asked to participate in the study. Yeah. Okay. So back to this. So again, they were not treated with respect. Second, they were actually harmed, right? Not being told about syphilis and treating them effectively caused them harm and suffering, and for some of them, death. So that is a huge piece. Secondary to that is not only did some of them suffer from symptoms of syphilis, they tried different types of treatment that really had no possible implication or causal reason as to why they should do that treatment. So for instance, several of them, they did spinal taps on. Now, I don't know if you guys know, but that is a very painful, very painful, trying to figure out, again, what is it they're trying to figure out? They're just like, I've got a captive audience, so I'm going to see, if there's any correlation there between spinal fluid and syphilis. You guys, my dogs are driving me bananas. Who wants my dogs right now? Come pick them up. I live in Ada. And she just barked. Yeah. Ugh. Okay. Third, the participants were a targeted, disadvantaged social group. They were both poor and a minority. And the groups of researcher and medical doctors and professionals were white men. So there's a piece there of racial inequality. And so that feeds into, again, there's a protective group. We should be mindful of all groups, and they were taken advantage of. Not good stuff. All right, Milgram's obedience study. Okay, so the study, the goal of it, this came in the 60s. So we're post-World War II, where atrocities took place, right? And that really led a lot of people to go, how could this happen? Like, how did people follow Hitler and do these awful things to fellow mankind, right? Like, how does that happen? And so a few hypotheses were floating around, and some people thought, well, Maybe it was just a time and place issue. Maybe it had to do with that time in Germany, something about being German. I mean, what's going on there? So the question was, let's replicate it here in the States, just to a smaller degree, right? But the issue at hand was obedience. That's what they were researching. Now, is that what they told participants?
No.
It is not. They didn't tell participants, hey, come and participate in the study. We want to see how well you follow directions, even when it seems insane what we're going to ask you. No, that was definitely not shared. What they did say is that it was a study on learning pattern and whether one was able to better learn when exposed to a negative stimulus when they got something wrong. Okay. Which that seems like, oh, okay. If you think about children, right? Do right, don't do wrong. Maybe insert a negative punishment as a way to teach them, right? Okay, so the study, the way it went is that a participant came in and they were told, you're going to be the teacher, right? You've been randomly assigned, you're going to be the teacher, except they were not randomly assigned. The learner, so to speak, was a Confederate. It was a fellow researcher who was acting. The teacher was standing behind this machine that had several different levers with different associated shocks with each lever. And so he had to go through with the student or the learner, he had to go through all these word pairs. So like table, apple, right? Long, alpaca. I'm making stuff up here, but just random non-related words. And every time the learner got something wrong, the teacher had to shock him. Now, again, they were not actually being shocked. It was a test to see how obedient the teacher would be to a researcher standing in a white coat behind him, telling him, you must continue, please continue. Now, that's all that was said. There was not a gun to the guy's head. He wasn't like, I'm going to find your family unless you press the thing. It wasn't that level of coercion. It was just having an authority figure present, instructing a teacher to keep going. Okay. What ended up happening is that a massive percent, well, let's guess here. What's the percentage that you think took it all the way to the part that says danger, extreme shock?
Pretty much all of them. I think.
Wasn't
So
it
you're
like-
thinking like 90% or something, Elizabeth?
Yeah.
I
Okay,
thought-
Ashley, what do you think?
I think it was between like 70 and 90.
Okay, so still a high percentage. Anybody else think or
I'm gonna
remember?
go 80%.
Okay, just split the difference, how it goes. Okay, it's actually a little lower than that, 65%, which is still incredibly high because the Confederate on the other end would give verbal feedback, say, ah, this hurts. Oh, my heart, I have a heart condition. Let me out of here. Let me out of here. You can't keep me. That kind of thing was being stated, right? And there was a partition so that the teacher, the real participant, could not see the learner, but could hear him. So despite all of that, the participants kept going through. And at the end, you don't hear anything. So the idea is the guy's passed out or is dying from all the shocks you're getting, and they're powering through. So now the ethical questions that pop up is, was this a necessary experiment? Do the ends justify the means? Learning about obedience. Was there any lasting psychological harm? The answer is yes, right? Like the people who went through as participants and saw that, because there was a debrief after, they were like, whoa, I did that, right? That's shocking. That's pretty hard. And again, yeah, like how does this benefiting us as a society? How does that help us? So let's watch this quick video here. And I want to make sure you guys can actually hear it.
Yep.
You guys can hear?
We
Not
can't
anymore.
see it though.
It's what?
We can't see it. We only see the link.
That's helpful. Okay. Why? technology, why? Screen 2, share sound. Let's try this again.
When I learn of incidents such as the massacre of millions of men, women, and children perpetrated by the Nazis in World War II, how is it possible, I ask myself, that ordinary people, who are courteous and decent in everyday life, can act callously, inhumanely, without any limitations of conscience? Now, there are some studies in my discipline, social psychology, that seem to provide a clue to this question. The problem I wanted to study was a little different. It went a little bit further. It was the issue of authority. Under what conditions would a person obey authority who commanded actions that went against conscience? These are exactly the questions that I wanted to investigate at Yale University. It is May 1962. An experiment is being conducted in the Elegant Interaction Laboratory at Yale University. The subjects are 40 males between the ages of 20 and 50 residing in the greater New Haven area.
Psychologists have developed several theories to explain how people learn. One theory is that people learn things correctly whenever they get punished for making a mistake.
40 years later, Milgram's infamous experiment, obedience, is still taught in classrooms around the world.
All right, teacher, would you take the test and be seated in front of the shock generator, please, in the next room?
But the experiment was rigged.
The victim was an accomplice of the experiment. The victim, according to plan, provided many wrong answers. His verbal responses were standardized on tape, and each protest was coordinated to a particular voltage level on the shock generator. Now, as teacher, you were seated in front of this impressive-looking instrument, the shock generator. Its essential feature is a line of switches that goes from 15 volts to 450 volts, and a set of verbal designations that goes from slight shock to moderate shock, strong shock, very strong shock, intense shock, extreme intensity shock, and finally XXX, danger severe shock. Your job, the experimenter explains to you, is a word pair test. If he gets each answer correctly, fine, you move on to the next pair. But if he makes a mistake, you are instructed to give him an electric shock, starting with 15 volts. And you increase the shock one step on each error.
Sorry, this is a Dutch video. Wait.
That is incorrect. This one will be 195 volts.
The learner was hidden from the teacher by a partition.
Of course, this was all a simulation. Nothing was really happening. But the learner made very convincing sounds of pain as the shocks increased.
This will be at 3:30.
And Milgram found, surprisingly and rather horrifyingly, that the majority of people would actually go right to the very highest level if there was some pressure from a man in a white coat who said things like,
"It's absolutely essential that you continue." Continue, please.
Let me out of here. My eyes bother me.
Go on.
Let me out. In fact, about 65% of the people who he studied, who were normal volunteers from the ordinary population, actually gave the maximum number of volts.
This man was one of those 65%.
This one will be 195 volts. The correct one.
Let me out of here.
Slow. Dance.
Let me out of here. My eyes bother me. Let me out of here. You have no right to keep me here. Let me out. Let me out of here. Let me out.
Continue, please.
Let me out of here. My eyes bother me. Let
Go
me
on.
out. Let me
You're
out.
responsible for it. Red. That is incorrect. This will be at 3:30. The correct phrase is rich
Let me out of
boy.
here. Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me. Let me out, I tell you. Let me out of here. Let me out of here. You have no right to hold me
The
here.
next phrase is
Let me
fast.
out. Let me out. Let me out. Let me out of here. Let me out. Let
Bird,
me out.
car, train, plane.
Eventually, the learner pretended to be unconscious.
Continue, teacher.
That is incorrect. This will be 3:45. The correct answer is fast bird.
What we learned from that experiment is that people will actually do an awful lot when they're put under pressure from authority figures. And the problem is, of course, that when we obey the unjust authority figure, the person who gives us immoral commands, then, of course, awful things can go wrong.
Nope, not replay. Just kidding. Okay. Thoughts about that?
I don't know if like that experience. Personally, I think that it's kind of valuable to have that information. Because of course, like all of us, if we hadn't watched that, could probably say like, I would never ever do that. But you're never gonna know unless you're actually put in that situation. So I think it's valuable in the sense that, you know, it helps us learn like we are susceptible to that, or we can be susceptible to that. So I don't know if they could actually do that experiment if they disclosed like, we want to know if you will save this person or not, because then it wouldn't work.
Then you may be looking at more like altruistic behavior rather than tendencies towards obedience.
Yeah.
Okay. Other thoughts?
From what you said earlier, lasting effects, I feel like all of these people have trust issues.
Oh, for sure. Can you hold my baby? Wait, who are you? Are you like, yeah.
Question.
Right.
Question authority.
Yeah. Actually, that's one of the similarities between the two studies, right? You have authority figures who are being deceitful, right? Like this is not about the right, they're not observing the right thing. The conditions of the study are not being transparent. And then obviously in the Tuskegee example, very much deceitful, very much did not share all the information. So, and actually just, I think it was on Monday, there was an article or a news report, I should say, that I listened to on NPR that was linking long-standing distrust of the medical system still in the Deep South in more minority regions that were less affluent. And that was shown very directly with the rates of refusal of the COVID vaccine, feeling like, I'm not sure I can trust you. And when you have a long history that says you really shouldn't, that is a problem. And so one of the videos I shared with the other class, we're not going to have enough time in this one, but I'll link it for you, is how several universities have tried to combat that, especially in young Black men, to regain trust within the medical community, because not getting medical care is also not the answer, right? Like there's got to be some sort of in between where trust can be rebuilt. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
It makes me think of the probability bias, I think it is that we've probably all walked past someone in our life that we were like, is that person all right? Or like a homeless person maybe that is on the ground. And I think in one instance, like there was a man who was actually dead for a full day and people just stepped over him and walked over him. And they all thought, well, someone else will probably help him. So
yeah, that's a concept of diffuse responsibility, right? So unless somebody, and there's a great article on that too. That's a study that was done in the 70s. Kitty Genevieve, I think was their name, where she was actually raped in this apartment complex that had 3 buildings. So it kind of made this atrium area and everyone could hear it. And everyone assumed someone else was calling the cops. Right? Huge issue. Huge issue. No. And that's why one of the first things, I mean, we've even taught that to our kids. If you're in trouble, ask for somebody, like you call 911, like point them out, give them a job, because people will rise to that. But if no one's being pointed out, right, we all respond to trauma and stress in different ways, fight or flight. We have learned that from James, like that's definitely something that happens. So unless you are put to a task, it's possible to just not respond appropriately. So.
Okay, so question about the video we just watched.
Yeah.
Did they record the occupation of the people that were being tested?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that was discussed.
It'd be really interesting to see like business owners that like, you know, they are their own authority.
Yeah. Well, and Anybody else catch what might have been missing from that participant pool?
They were all white men.
Yes. There's no women. There's no diversity. Again, so it's the 60s, men between 20 and 50 from New Haven. One might make some conclusion if you're near Yale University as to your socioeconomic status, right? So there's definitely several points of limitations of that study. And when you think about external validation, right, when you're looking at that validity, I wonder. Now, again, it's beyond the scope of this class, but look it up. Milgram's study, like repeated, it's been redone. 2012, I think was the last time that they showed results. And it's fascinating. So they tweaked it, but there's still lots of info out there that shows that human behavior is not changed. So, okay, let's dive in a little bit. Can you guys see this? Yes. So from those two studies, those are the two main seminal studies that have propelled ethical, principles to be developed. The Belmont Report was created to really establish some principles and applications that all researchers, whether a principal investigator, teacher, student, clinician, anyone who would have something to do with research, that they would follow through. So first, there's the principle of respect of persons, which requires that participants give informed consent. Now, you guys are all familiar with that now, but it's information about the study that outlines risks and benefits, so that participants, before they say, yes, I will be part of your study, they have been given at least a summary as to the scope of the study and the potential risks that they face. So this idea of giving informed consent also implies not coercing participants to participate. So you need to avoid large incentives or even like negative consequence. So this is actually an issue that we've talked about. I'm on the IRB board of a different university. And we've talked about, undergraduate students, oftentimes you'll need to participate in a study in order to get extra credit or even just research credit for your class. Aquinas, I don't think is like that, but the large undergrad institutions, so I went to the University of California, Irvine. I was one of 400 students in the lecture halls for Psych 101. That was one of my requirements. I had to participate in 3 research studies. And I mean, it's self-serving a bit, right? Because social scientists want their studies to be done. College students are kind of a captive audience, but they're also capturing this like young adult age group that's kind of ideal. But when now you need to do a specific experiment in order to get a grade, that brings up some questions, especially in certain semesters where there's very limited options as to which study a student can participate in. So you need to be mindful of that. So you don't want to offer too large a benefit, which is swaying people to do it, or a large enough negative consequence if they don't do it, right? So it needs to be balanced. The second principle is the principle of beneficence. So it's, again, doing no harm. So you need to just really be thoughtful as keeping the good. Like that's what you're keeping in mind. And there may be risk involved, but the good outweighs the risk at all times. That's what you're trying to strive for. Oh, let me go back real quick to informed consent. Is there specific groups of people that we need to be especially cautious in getting informed consent?
Children.
Children, yes. Any other group?
With mental handicaps.
Right. Cognitive disabilities, that's always going to be an issue that you want to really be protective. Anything else?
The elderly.
Elderly.
Poor people.
Okay. So, any individual from a protected class. How about prisoners? That's another one, right? Okay. So again, it's not because you may see them as a captive audience that they are, right? Like they need to have rights as well. Okay, so moving on. The last one is oh, sorry, I feel like I was an echo. Did you guys hear an echo?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was all good.
You were all good? Maybe it's just me? Okay. Anyway, maybe somebody's mic was on and it was reverberating. The last one is the principle of justice. So you want to make sure who is this going to benefit, right? Who's going to benefit for the research? it cannot just be the pharmaceutical company, right? So that goes back to Goldacre's example, right? If a pharmaceutical company is putting out there this brand new drug and they're only comparing it to a placebo, right? That's going to make their drug look better by default. So who is that benefiting? That's benefiting the pharmaceutical company. Is it really benefiting the general population? Possibly, but their study is not going to support that unless that it is compared against the common ongoing treatment, like drug of choice, right? And then is it a representation of all people? So are you really trying to generalize it to all and make sure that everybody can apply? So if I am doing a study that only impacts women, well, it's okay for my participants to only be women, right? It kind of would make no sense if I'm asking about some sort of uterus involved thing and I'm like, let's have a bunch of dudes be part of that. They don't have the equipment. That makes no sense, right? So you need to be thoughtful about principle of justice. Does it represent all people? Okay, protecting vulnerable populations. So little kiddos. How cute is this little kiddo, by the way? Sidebar, have any of you guys Googled kids in an MRI machine? I had a girlfriend text me about that the other day.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Isn't it the most hilarious thing ever?
Yep.
Google it. Take a second, guys. You'll like it. Just infants or babies in MRI machines. They're like smushed. They look like they're in a blender. In fact, at first I was like, is that kid in a blender? But no, it's just in the things because they have to hold them. Anyway, okay, so that was a lot of tangents. I guess that's just how my brain works once we get to this late in the day after it's so many hours of teaching. Okay, so Belmont report came out. They developed those core principles to make sure that everybody is kept safe. From there on, institutional review boards were established. So the goal of institutional review boards is to protect human participants from harm. So when somebody designs a study, they need to make sure to get approval from the institutional review board of their institution or medical facility, because it's an outside observer, somebody who's more objective, looking in to make sure that the study is sound. So in an IRB protocol, you will have to include part of your history, like why you're doing the study, what are your hypotheses, what's your methodology. You need to include in there your actual informed consent, and then what are the potential risks that your participants are facing. This is why we're not doing a full-blown study in this course, because you would all then need to go through IRB review, and it takes anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks, which we just don't have the time for. Now, having said that, we will still have an informed consent form for participants to fill out and agree to participating. And it'll state very clearly in there that it is only for the purpose of a class. It is not going to be published. And if anybody feels uncomfortable, they can stop at any time, right?
Now,
Okay.
Question.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but so for this review board, so
Mhm.
if I'm doing a research study that I'm going to publish,
Mhm.
I have to find all of my people and then have them fill out the forms and then bring it to the review board?
No. Okay, so when you say bring it, give it to all my people, what do you mean, like participants?
Like the participants in the subject or in the
So
test.
great question. So here's the order of event. First, you get a thought about a research study. So research question. You then write kind of your manuscript or your proposal or what your goal is for the study, right? So you write that up. Before you do any data collection, you need to have IRB approval. So you complete your write-up, then you submit your protocol to the IRB. And then once you get a yay, you're good to go, then you can go and collect data. Now, it is possible they, excuse me, it's my turn.
Bless you.
Thank you. That they may deem your research study to have some ethical pitfalls, and they'll give you some suggestions on how to change it. There are times where they go hard pass. Nope, we're not supporting that. Our institution is not about that. I had this happen once with a student at a Christian organization that was dealing with LGBT issues, and the university was like, nope, because of our mission statement that whatever you find is going to be in direct opposition with what we believe in, so this study cannot take place here. So it can be as simple as, well, not simple. That's not simple, and it's really unfortunate, but it's not like, oh, that person wanted to give everyone a disease, right? And that's why it passed. No, it's just because it didn't line up with the university. So that does happen, although it's fairly rare. Usually they give you a way to like, hey, you need to reword this because that's not the most ethical right here.
So you said that, sorry, I stepped out for a minute.
Okay.
So you said that we are submitting something like
No.
this? Okay.
No. We are not doing an IRB review because this is only for the purpose of a class. It is not going to get published. And we're picking a pretty vanilla topics. Like there shouldn't be any issues with students. What I was saying is if you are conducting research, like your Elizabeth researcher, PhD, you would write up your write-up, why you're interested in the study, why it's important, what's your hypothesis, fill out your IRB protocol. Once you get the approval, then you can collect data.
Okay.
That's what I was describing now. Okay. So from those principles, we then, like the APA, the American Association of Psychologists, American Psychological Association, I don't know what's wrong with me there, devised some ethical principles. And so they fall right in line with those 3 principles. They just added a couple more. And they made it clear that anybody who is involved at any level of research, again, whether student, professor, clinician, obviously researcher, everyone working in the field of psychology needs to be responsible and needs to keep in mind ethical coverage of participants and make sure everybody stays safe and away from harm. Okay, so this is the piece that was added with the APA. So part of being an ethical researcher is to also not fake results, right? Now, I feel like faking and falsifying data should be kind of a no-brainer that we don't do that, right? Like as part of even APA guidelines, we talk about plagiarism, that you shouldn't cheat, you shouldn't copy other people's work. So that kind of falls into that same path there. This is the article on vaccines that was discussing, again, autistic-like deficiencies after a vaccine. Now, again, looking at that title, you don't have Jenny McCarthy going, yes, and the iliolymphoid nodular hyperplasia, nonspecific colitis, and pervasive developmental disorder in children. No, right? Like it's, so from there she gleaned, vaccine and autism. And even if you look at the method, this very first section here, how many kids?
12.
12 children. What do we see as problematic there?
Very
small.
tiny population.
Very small sample size. Very small.
Also, it's 11 boys.
Yeah. So not what I would consider a mixed group. Okay, hold on. Somebody is chatting. I can't. Not enough. Yes. Oh my gosh, Lauren, thank you for saying that. I thought none of you guys looked at it, and I was like, they all think I'm a freak now. But yes, it is super weird. Like they're in a little tube. Okay. So this particular researcher was found to have completely falsified data, fake, fabricated data for his own benefit of who knows what, wanted some notoriety, can't do that. So from there, you can see the 3 Belmont report criteria are right here, the basic principles, and then it falls right in line again here with what we're looking for per the APA. We've just added a couple of different things under the beneficence. So obviously you want to treat people in a way that benefits them and do not, right, do good, do no harm, kind of going hand in hand. But this is another piece that was added specifically with the APA. It's this idea of fidelity and responsibility. And so that we need to establish relationships of trust, which kind of goes back to what you said, Kyle, earlier. If you're running studies which have so much deception by omission, right? Like they're deceiving participants by not telling them enough, or by commission by lying to them, that goes at the crux of trust, right? Which is a problem. And then you need to make sure to accept responsibility for professional behavior in whatever domain that you're employed. So whether it's in research and teaching or in clinical practice. And then within this beneficence, they also added this other principle of integrity. And this is where not falsifying or producing fake data would fall into. So we strive to be accurate, truthful, and honest in our role as researcher, teacher, and practitioner. Okay. So there are 10 specific standards that are outlined in the APA as to what is ethical behavior. So first, we discussed what are institutional review boards. We talked about this already. What is informed consent? But specifically, what is considered deception? I kind of talked about it already. So there's two forms of deception. So you can have deception because of omission. So you are not sharing what the study is really about. So Milgram would be a good example of that, right? Because they shared that it was misleading information because it says this is a test about learning, when really it was about obedience, right? So that's omission. And then doing deception by commission is actually lying to participants. So actively telling them something inaccurate to see how they respond. Now, are we allowed to use deception ever in research?
So
you think no? Anybody else?
I think yes.
Anybody else?
I think yes.
You think yes? Okay. Anybody else?
I
think yes, because of the placebo effect.
Say more about that, McKenna.
Well, basically, like, you are telling someone that they're getting a drug, and if you get the placebo, you're not actually getting that. And so you're trying to see how they act from thinking they have the active drug.
Okay, so McKenna, great example. So you're thinking, yes, you're allowed to deceive because obviously there's experiments out there where they use a placebo, and a placebo is not stated that, enjoy your sugar pill, right? No one says that. They say, here's your treatment, right? And then you're looking at the psychological impact and whether somebody states they're feeling better just by having a placebo rather than the actual treatment. Okay, that's a very, very good critical thinking right there. The answer is yes with an asterisk. So yes, you are allowed to use deception if you are doing appropriate debriefing afterwards. Again, your deception needs to be linked to your research, right? Needs to be a requirement for effective and valid research results. You're not just going to lie willy-nilly just because why not, right? That's not appropriate. That would not be ethical. There needs to be a reason why withholding information or giving incorrect information falls in line with your study. In all of those cases, once the study is done, researchers need to debrief with participants as to what's up, like what just happened, right? So the debriefing needs to happen. Again, it's a session, usually either via paper if it's just a online study, or it'll be in person if they were there present or witnessed something, talking about, hey, we are doing this study. This was actually the goal. Here's why we lied to you or omitted some information. And also, here are resources should you not feel good about it, right? That becomes hand in hand what needs to happen. You need to make sure to equip participants with adequate resources to manage whatever emotion may pop up from the deception. Make sense? Yeah. You seem like you want to say something, Kyle, or you just got excited, or?
A little excited. My only thought process is like when some researchers say that, like, hey, come to the study, but the real study is just watching to see how long they wait. And then I'm thinking about like how like the debrief would go, and then I got excited.
Yeah.
Well,
and this happens, like, again, the reason why they include clinicians in there is that psychological assessment needs to also follow ethical behavior. But with certain assessment, you can't be honest with people as to what you're testing, because otherwise the jig would be up. So when I worked in state hospitals in California, one of the tools we use, I often worked with sex offenders. And so they're incarcerated, but in a state hospital because of a coexisting mental disorder. And, obviously what's their goal? Their goal is to get out, right? And so in order to get out, we need to do a risk assessment. And if there's been a sex offense, we need, again, what we're talking about in the last lecture, we need with some level of certainty that the results we are getting from our assessment is not going to be a false like positive. Oh, they're good to go. Okay, bye-bye. Enjoy your life, right? When you're like, oh, shoot, actually, they reoffended, right? Pretty large impact. So you want to be really conservative on those tests. You would rather have a false negative, meaning they're not allowed to get out in that point. Like you can use those words kind of interchangeably here, but you would prefer that for the risk of society at large. Now, again, we could have a whole discussion just based on that. But one of the tests we did would be if somebody is sitting in front of a computer and they're shown pictures of different people, right? Again, think sex offense, so like a variety of things that they might find arousing. And the question would be, do you find this arousing, yes or no? Right. Okay, so if you are sitting in the seat of somebody who's been incarcerated for a sex offense and you see something, well, let me back her up. What are you most likely to respond on a test like that?
No.
No, right? Why is that?
Because you're a sex offender. Everyone thinks that you're sexually attracted to everything. So might as well just say, I'm sexually attracted to nothing.
Exactly. Okay, so there's kind of this full-blown, like, I recognize that a certain behavior I've engaged in. And again, let's just be real here. Like you could be 19 and drunk and urinate on a school property, and that is considered a sex offense. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean all bad, whatever your mind went to, doesn't necessarily mean that. And now I need to be careful what I say because my 10-year-old just got here. But okay, so you're looking at these things, and of course you're going to want to say no because you're going to want to seem normal. You're going to want to seem like this is not an issue. So now, what do you think? Is the test actually looking at your answer? Is that what it's testing?
No.
Why is that, Elizabeth?
Because of the bias that they would probably implement in order to get out.
Right.
I'm curious to know how you would account for their trustworthiness. How you would actually know that?
How you would believe them?
Yeah, or how you would make a test that would say, that would remove that element of whether you have to trust them or not, trust their answers.
So, and that is why most of these assessments have a validity scale as part of them. I'll talk about two others in a moment, but specifically with this one, it is the length of time they view an image. That is what's being tested. Because what we know is something you're not attracted to, you're like, click, hello, Tinder, swipe, swipe, swipe. The other way, I don't even know, but you know what I mean. Just no, don't want to see that, don't want to see that. Something that you're like, maybe you spend a little bit more time on. So that is the measurement that's happening. So the test tabulates what they say yes and no to, and then you correlate that with the length of time they view images. That tells you two things. A, how honest they're being, right? Because if there's a huge discrepancy, you need to talk about their own level of insight. They're maybe malingering, right? So they're lying with a secondary benefit because they want to get out, right? So there's lots to look at there. But most psychological assessment have a built-in validity scale because inherently, and we'll talk about this semester, self-report questionnaires are faulty. They are subject to social norms and social rules, right? No one wants to say or admit negative behavior that makes them look bad, and even less illegal behavior. No one wants to admit that either, right? That's not a good point. So one of the psychological assessment is the MMPI. Have you guys heard about that? The Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, one of the most widely used assessment of personality. It's 567 questions. It is not short. And what you do on there is I think there's three main validity scales to check if people are being truthful. Because Elizabeth, you're right. How can you trust anything they say, right? How could I trust what any of you guys say unless I've actually have built-in validity scales? So there is a scale that looks at how likely you are to write yes or no, right? So some sort of bias towards yes or bias towards no. There's a consistency scale, which means each question is kind of asked 3-4 times, and they're looking to see if those answers match up, right? That goes against random responding, which would make a test completely invalid. There's social desirability scale. How, like, there are certain things that we all want to say yes, that we exemplify. Like, I am a generous human. Who's marking no on that? Right? I don't know who's like, nope, I'm stingy. What's the guy from Scrooge? Is that, yeah. Anyway, no one wants to be that person. There are certain levels that you want to appear better than you are. You want to be more seen as more socially desirable. But within that, there's a certain scale, right? One of the questions, actually, I don't think it's on the MMPI, it might be on the MCMI, is I have brushed my teeth every day of my life. Yes or no?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
Right. I would say like 99% of the population, honestly, the answer is probably no, because you were also a toddler. I mean, I'm assuming it's not just my toddler who does this. I brush my teeth. And you're like, fine, skip a night. Good Lord, I just want you to go to bed, right? That'll happen. Or as an adult where you're like, maybe you're like, I forgot my toothbrush, totally forgot. Or I'm camping and I'm whatever, right? There's going to be instances where that'll apply. Or you just didn't feel like it, okay? Right, but that is not socially desirable. Now, if you get somebody who marks yes on all the social desirability scale, the validity of the results are put into question because they are trying to appear good. Now let's flip it on its head. Can you find an occasion where somebody would want to appear bad on purpose?
Okay, I mean, I have a harebrained one, but it's
okay. I think we can come up with some ideas here. Let's say, okay, let me give you a scenario. You have just been caught and you have stolen from a store and you made a run for it and they caught you and now they're saying, dude, taking you to jail. Could you see an instance where faking bad might be to your benefit?
If you're cold, so if you're homeless and you want to, 3 square meals and somewhere to sleep, maybe.
Very good. Right. So that would be presenting in a certain way for a secondary gain. So my current situation, I'm not going to be honest about this because I have something to gain at the end of the line if I lie in this way. That is called malingering. Now, if I, let's say, okay, I'm going to go a little dark here, bear with me. I murder someone. This was like girlfriend, she's cheating on me, can't handle it, gonna kill her, right? Police shows up, they're like, you have blood all over you and a dead body in the living room. What is going on? Perhaps in a moment, I'm like, I heard voices. The voices told me to do it. Maybe faking that and faking that I have a mental illness is more beneficial to me because that leads me to a state hospital rather than prison. I feel like now I'm giving you guys ideas. Don't do that. But FYI, this happens all the time. Because in what way do you suspect state hospitals are different than prisons?
I guess, yeah,
they're what?
Food. You probably get access to, you might get access to a computer every once in a while. So you're probably not in there with, well, okay, I guess other like big air quotes here, and this is kind of disrespectful, but other air quote, crazy people. I don't know.
Well, so right. There are some states, so the state hospital where I worked, it was co-ed. You could have a girlfriend. If things happened that people didn't notice, right? In jail, things might happen. I'm going to leave that thought there. But it's usually not co-ed, right? It's usually a little scarier to be in prison versus state hospital. Accommodations are usually much nicer. You're not treated as much like a criminal in a state hospital as you would be in a jail. Plus, there's this belief that if I act, like you said, Elizabeth, crazy, I'll be let off. I can just not pay for the crime because I didn't actually mean to do it. So the number of people we would see that would fake like they had a mental illness was extremely high. Now, if we've all taken statistics, right? If you are going to fake like you have a mental illness, the biggest piece that's usually the biggest red flag are the people who fake all of the symptoms. They're hearing voices, they believe they're Jesus, they are completely amnestic, they have no memory of anything that's ever happened in the past. They are going to act like they're manic, right? They're like, I'm going, I haven't slept in 3 days. They're going to throw all of the symptoms that they know of that they might recognize from a movie, throw all those together in a big lump to seem as sick as possible. The laws of probability tell us what is the likelihood that somebody would have all of those mental disorders?
Pretty slim.
Like 0, right? You could be schizophrenic, but then you wouldn't have amnesia, right? Or you could be bipolar, but then you might not have delusions of grandeur in quite the same way. So again, a non-sophisticated liar would throw everything at you, all of the symptoms, but you know the likelihood of that being true is pretty false, which means they're likely fabricating for a secondary gain. With all of those instruments, again, there's a validity scale that will tell us what's the likelihood of this being true so we can catch whether we can actually use the instrument and the data we get from it or not. So again, a lot of these, you're using deception. You're not being intentional or overt about what the test is about, because if you were, you would get totally different results, right? And then it wouldn't be valid anymore. I feel like I took a really big, sharp right turn here, but anyway, that goes with it. Research misconduct. We talked about this a little bit. Don't make up data, don't falsify it, and don't cheat. Seems pretty clear to me. And then animal research, that's another big piece. So we don't talk about animal research as much in this class, but there is legal protection of animals that are in a lab when you're going to be doing studies and experiments with them. What's your go-to thought? Like, what animal do we use in the social sciences, and for what reason would you say?
Probably rats, isn't it? Or mice?
Yeah, rats and mice are most commonly used. And it's usually for learning, right? Learning patterns. If you think about Watson, Pavlov, a lot of those guys, they're trying to figure out like what's a learning behavior. So the new care guidelines involves the 3 R's. So the first R is replacement, meaning is there a way that you could replace out an animal with instead some sort of computer model, so that you, instead of using a live animal that needs care, and again, that you might be doing harm or increased stress on that animal, does there exist some sort of computer simulation that would give you very similar data? And oftentimes the answer is yes. Refinement is how could research procedures in ways of caring for the animal, like your methodology, what can you do to reduce the distress as much as possible? So be really refined and precise as to how they need to be treated, so we reduce that stress as much as possible. And lastly is reduction. Don't use 100 rats if 10 rats will give you the same answer, right? Reduce the number of animals that are going to be utilized in your study so that you're having the least amount of impact and you're showing the greatest level of care towards animals. Now, broadly, what do you guys feel are the attitudes that both researchers and students, like what attitudes do we hear when we bring about animal research?
Usually what we think of is the big like PETA advertisements about like intense cruelty to animals.
Right. That's definitely a huge part of it. Now, what other attitudes might be out there?
That they're super pro animal research because it's not on humans.
Yeah, so there's exactly those 2 polar opposite attitudes that exist. Yes, do it on an animal, figure out what's going on, especially if there's large similarities in our genetic code. Try it out on them first before we figure out if it's safe for a human. And others that say they're animals. Like, what do we think about the issue of informed consent here? Can they give informed consent? No, they cannot. So we are picking a group that holds very little agency for themselves because we don't get informed consent, we just do it, right? So both exist. So there needs to be a really fine balance, again, whenever there's going to be animal research, between what is the benefit. Do we actually need to be doing this research on animals? Can it be done any other way that would show us the same results? And are we treating the animals with the utmost respect and care that we can? Right? That's the line that we toe. In all of this, it's a huge ethical balance. Like, have you guys heard about some of those philosophical debates in terms of harm, right? Like the railroad example with the wagon that goes down the hill, and you have access to the lever that can switch the tracks. If it stays on the track that it's in, it's going to kill like 6 people. If you pull the lever, it's going to switch tracks and it's going to just kill 1 person. What do you do? So these kinds of philosophical dilemmas that they're very hard. It's hard to know what you should do. And a lot about research, you found yourself in that, right? Is it worth it to do research on a new drug where there might be really bad negative side effects, but the long term is that this drug is way better than another one in treating symptoms? Is it? I mean, it is hard to know. I don't have the answers here. This is just something that you need to ponder and think through. And I think whenever you walk in with a research idea, a research protocol, that is what you need to weigh. Yeah. Okay. Guys, we rocked it. I feel like this is we caught up a lot. I didn't think we were going to get to here. I want to make sure you guys have access to the link for that video. It is this one here. Can I put it in the chat? I guess you guys won't have it then, huh? I probably should just put it on Course Connect. What do we think? Let me add it here just in case. Oh, I was sending it to just one student. Never mind, send it to everyone. I'll add it to Course Connect. It's over an hour, but it talks specifically about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment and then somewhat of the backlash, obviously, that's been happening in race relation, seeking medical treatment, and trust of Western medicine, which has been ongoing.
So what should we have done by next week?
I love that. Elizabeth, you're like, bottom line, what do we need to do? Hold on, let me pull it up. Just keep me on my toes. I like it.
I stepped out for a little bit. I didn't want to have missed anything.
No, you didn't miss anything. So it is week 3 this week. You need to make sure you have your research certificate done. Most of you have emailed it. If you are struggling in taking it, keep practicing, keep reading. It is not meant to be hard or a big, I guess what I want to say is I didn't assign this as like, oh, now I'll get them. This is a really hard assignment. And my goal is that it should be simple and straightforward. You can have 2 browsers open so that you have the literature written, research things if you're struggling. So we covered ethics and IRB. We are going to go through the literature review and introduction and how I want you guys to write that up next week. And your research topics are due by next week. So you need to have that formalized. Now, most of you do. That's great. Make sure you go back into the chat and for the discussion thread for the choose your topic and write that in if you haven't already. And then, yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, Article 2 is not due until week 5, which I think is like the 17th. Did we talk about that already? I think we did.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Enjoy the rest of your gorgeous Wednesday since it's nice and sunny out there. Be prepared. Next week's supposed to be wet, like 0. So we'll enjoy that. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. See y'all later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.